On today's episode, we learn how children shouldn't be taught to be tough, are shocked to find out John Bolton feels safer with Joe Biden, hear how Democrats made the government magically lower medical costs, hear someone float a jury duty substitute teaching scheme, and lastly, analyze Andrew Yang's rapid descent to shameful grandstanding. This is Cringe Posts. Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of the Cringe Posts podcast. This is the show where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes that we find in our feeds, and we take them apart and talk about where they go wrong, what makes them cringe, and hopefully we can, give some guidances to help you identify cringe in your feed as well and take it on and combat it. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host Britt. And before we make fun of other people, we always make fun of ourselves because we have all had bad social media takes and posts. Before we get into that, just a quick reminder to like and share and leave a review for the podcast. Helps us out a lot. You can do that on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your audio content, and subscribe on YouTube. That helps us out a lot as well. And if you want to follow along the visual posts and you're listening to this on an audio device, but you want to see these posts, we put them up at cringeposts.com, so make sure to check them out there. Without further ado, we're going to get into an old post for my co-host Britt here, and I have not seen this yet. And so I'm waiting with bated breath to see, I believe, a video that Britt's got queued up here. So I'm very excited to watch. And I don't know if you want to give any prelude or preface to it.
Yeah. So I toured in a rock and roll band for a long time when I was young, and this is a video. I don't think there's any audio on this one, but I'll get you the audio later so people might be able to hear it. But this is a show we were playing. I think we were out in Eastern Washington somewhere, and it's about 30 seconds long, but you'll see why. It's a classic fail video.
All right, I'm excited.
Yeah, so I got some cool lights going. I'm out here on the left, younger me with a guitar. That's about $1,000 guitar, which is kind of important. See me check the strap. Oh boy. Gearing up for a guitar swing right here.
I know.
Dong.
Oh, no.
Oh man! So for those of you that are listening, I tried to do a guitar swing with this $1,000 guitar, which I really love, and my guitar strap popped out and it quickly cascaded across the floor. Broken.
Oh,
so sad.
Did it actually wreck the guitar?
The neck was fine, but the body was pretty mangled up, so I had to do some work on it. But it's got some nice scars on it, which is good. That happened. I didn't know that I had to do these certain types of screws to make everything hold together. And so about every 10 or so times I throw my guitar, they just rip out.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so it was so embarrassing, man. It's the most embarrassing thing. That was a big show too. I mean, you can't see the audience, but there was 400 or 500 people there, and that's our big song, and I flung it. And
high pressure, yeah. Well, I it's better than destroying your equipment intentionally, as many rock and roll stars are wont to do. I hate that. I
never had enough money to do that, so
yeah. I remember, it's funny. It's kind of a trope that you see, especially on concerts you'd watch on YouTube, or not many musicians I go see would intentionally destroy stuff. But I went and saw with actually our mutual friend John. I went to see Connor Oberst of Bright Eyes, and the last song he does that. He's throwing the music stands and the mic stands down and trashing the stage. And I always thought it was so childish and petty. And our friend John was I thought it was funny and fun in the moment. But I don't know, for me, I'm always that kind of stuff I don't get. So at least you're not doing it intentionally with your guitar.
Yes.
There.
I saw a video of Pearl Jam, and their guitar player got all pissed off about something. He legit was just wrecking everything. Mm-hmm. And I was just man, you're 60, 70 years old and you still haven't figured out how to, one, have all your gear work every night, and then two, you're going to throw a temper tantrum like that. That's pretty embarrassing. Almost as embarrassing as trying to look cool and throw a guitar swing and have it cascade across the floor. But
yeah, it's kind of a much higher stakes drumstick toss, Yes. I feel those go wrong more often than than anything else, but it's also very low. Like, all right, just pull out a new one and keep going. Whereas a $1,000 guitar is a little different.
Yeah, and it's all in an effort to look cool, not because I'm actually angry or anything. So big fail.
Well, at least the guitar survived, didn't snap a neck or anything like that. Okay, we'll move to our first post here. This one is a picture of a slide. I would love to know what this like presentation was about or the whole thing, but this slide reads, "What if instead of relying on children to be resilient, we create a world that is less traumatic?" What's funny about this and what strikes me is that I love the idea that the person writing this thinks that people's goal in life is to rough up or make the world a worse place somehow. Like that's generally speaking not what the aim of people's lives are. And so if you're saying that there's going to be a trade-off, because obviously in life you have to prioritize, but also multiple things can be true. So this person is telling you to prioritize making the world less traumatic rather than trying to rely on children to be resilient. Whereas I guess my take here would be, well, yeah, like do things in your own life that will make the world less traumatic, but teach your children to be resilient because the world is traumatic. The world is rough. The world is difficult. And, you know, we're not relying on children to be resilient any more than you're relying on them to be able to learn good behavior. I think one of the problems with parenting that I've seen, and I know it's a very difficult endeavor, so I don't mean to sort of, you know, ref from the sidelines or anything, but I feel like parents these days try to take away responsibility from children and their behavior and their actions.
Yes.
And that has not created a generation of people who are able to make the world less traumatic, because if you actually want to reduce the amount of trauma in the world, you actually have to build people with good character who are willing to do work and endure hardship to make the world a better place. I think one of the most important things that you see in good theming of stories and I don't know, mores that are taught down and passed on from generation to generation is that, you know, the people who make the world a better place are the ones who have endured something hard. And so I think that that's one of those things where, yes, you absolutely want to create a better world. Sure, let's make it more traumatic, but don't do that at the cost of teaching your children to be resilient, because resilience is a character quality that you want everyone to have.
Yeah, and this slide or this picture was by this Instagram page called Impact, and they had a bunch of, you know, on the actual post itself, which I didn't include for whatever reason. You know, they basically are talking about like different ways to make the world less traumatic, and they're sneaking in things, right? They're sneaking in like, well, we need to be more open to, you know, your child exploring their gender, or you know, you don't want to put too much work on the kid, or making a more accepting classroom, you know, that doesn't have, you know, puts more emphasis on trying to get the answer as opposed to getting the right answer. And that's why these things are so sneaky, right? It's like it depends on how you define trauma. And we define trauma. I would define trauma as like or traumatic event as like, oh yeah, like you were significantly abused as a kid, physically and emotionally, in such a way that is legitimate abuse, you know, like you were actually punched, hurt, things like that. You know, starved, put under, you know, a closet like Harry Potter or something like that. Like that's traumatic for a child. It's not traumatic for parents to say, hey, you got to go to bed on time, or hey, you got to do your dishes, or hey, you know, it's not okay for you to go, you know, be out past your curfew with people doing whatever you're going to do. And that's what happens with these slides and these types of, you know, kind of memed philosophy is they're like, well, you could kind of overlay whatever you think you don't like as trauma, and reclassify it as trauma to get your way. And it's a very deceptive and self-deceiving way to live your life, because they'll kind of go back and retroactively say like, oh yeah, like my parents didn't want me to have a boyfriend or girlfriend until I was 16. Like that was really traumatic. It's like, no, your parents were just looking out for you, you know, or your parents said, hey, you got to be home by, you know, 11, you know, stuff like that. And so, you know, there's that aspect of it. And then there's the other aspect that you were talking about, which is like Jonathan Haidt's The Coddling of the American Mind, which is like children are anti-fragile, right? So like things that are like children are not easily broken, and in fact they need to have stretching experiences for them to continue to grow. And if they don't have those experiences, if they don't grow, if they don't continue to become anti-fragile, you end up with really weak adults that aren't able to actually function in society. And so it's and I think most parents would agree with us, all the parents that I know in my life, and that would agree with me. It's like and who was that guy we had from the John 13 podcast?
Oh yeah, Jonathan. Yeah.
Jonathan. Yeah. So Jonathan, basically said, he's like, yeah, like children are the goal of a parent is to indoctrinate your child into what is right and what is good, because they are just a sponge. They need to be, they're in the learning tutorial phase of the video game. Like they need to learn what they're even playing. And so part of that is like, okay, like you've got to have an experience, and every new experience is going to be somewhat traumatic, or to these people's definition, stretching in some way. And the only way for you to become competent in it is to do it so many times and willfully confront it in such a way that it becomes something that's normal and easy to do, and you can do it without thinking. When you don't do that, you become less capable. And this looks like it's in some sort of public school or something, for some public presentation. And they teach the exact opposite of that, which is no, you be as least capable as possible, and that way you need to rely on the government and public schools and the system to aid you and help you get through life.
Yeah, and I think that there's a balance to everything, obviously, in parenting, where teaching your kid responsibility by saying, you own, loading and emptying the dishwasher. That's your job, and if it's not done, we're gonna give you some form of discipline, whether that's like you're grounded from going out with your friends, or it's you don't get access to electronics, whatever those experiences are. Like that, setting some sort of reasonable cause and effect like that, I don't think is traumatic. Now, however, if you're enforcing that and screaming at your kid because they didn't do it, that would be traumatic. And that's something that obviously we're not saying that, it's all, all discipline is equal. Obviously not. You need to have proportional and relative to whatever the situation is, kind of teaching in the moment. So as a parent, you need to exercise discernment and wisdom as to how you discipline, if that's the kind of thing, so that you're not actually creating legitimate trauma in your children's lives. Like there are legitimate cases of, a good thing being a traumatic experience for someone because it is executed wrong. However, you also have to recognize that things are going to be traumatic by degrees. So if let's say you have a kid and you do not make them do anything in their whole life. They don't have to go to school if they don't want to. They don't have to do any chores. They don't have to eat foods they don't like. And then one night you say, hey, I'm going to need you to clean your shower and tub. And they're like, I don't want to. I'm not going to do that. And you make them do that. And then again, after that point, you don't make them do that. That's going to be a traumatic experience for them because they are used to a certain level of expectation of what reality is. And so on the one hand, it's like making the world a less traumatic place. If you're talking about sort of it's almost a relative term. It's almost not that meaningful unless you put context about what you do or don't mean by that. So when they have this list and it's like letting them explore their sexual identity. No, that's not traumatic unless you're either doing it to a wrong degree, like screaming at your kid or physically using them, which is obviously wrong, no matter where you are on the morality of that sort of thing. But also like if you're, telling them that no, the world is a real place and there are, things that are true and aren't true. And if you're enforcing that once and then you don't touch it again because they have such a negative reaction to it and that's traumatic for them, well, actually, you don't want to make the world a less traumatic place by not enforcing that. You want to make it a less traumatic place because you are constantly affirming that and they grow tough and they grow resilient. So again, I don't think that the first part of this slide and the second part are mutually exclusive at all. Oftentimes, by making kids resilient, you are making the world a less traumatic place for them and in general.
That's good.
Okay, moving on to our low-hanging fruit provider here, Occupy Democrats. They tweet out, breaking, Newsmax host freaks out and asks John Bolton if he's out of his mind after Bolton says America is safer under Joe Biden because Trump didn't understand really anything about the world. Retweet if you think that Bolton is right for once. And I'd hate to tell everyone who retweeted that, but you don't think that Bolton is right for once. You actually think Bolton is right a lot of the time, because Bolton and
That's good.
the Democrats are no different. The Republicans and the different Democrats are very, very, very little different. Populist Republicans maybe, but Bolton is not a populist Republican by any stretch of the imagination. Bolton is as caked in with these, Democrat, to think there's any sort of substantive difference between Joe Biden and John Bolton in terms of their actual viewpoints. Like, name a substantive difference, except that maybe at one point Biden said something that was a little bit less hawkish than Bolton. But there really, there's not that many examples of that even being true. Biden's been extremely hawkish. So these people acting like it's this, whoa, even John Bolton thinks Biden is better than Trump. It's like, yeah, of course, because Trump dared cross, at least in rhetoric, if not as much in action, although to some degree in action, the neocon line. It's just so goofy and silly to think that. I mean, that'd be like, I don't know, me getting into an argument with someone on Twitter and then saying, look, even Brit agrees with me. Like, yeah, the co-host of your podcast that you're both on. Why is that like a crazy crossover? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's so funny is the if you think that Bolton is right for once. Well, it's like you're saying, if you think he's right now, it's not once. It's you've thought he's right. He's being consistent in how he thinks.
Yeah.
He did not like how Trump managed foreign policy. What really got me is like, I don't know, do you feel like if you just kind of like look at face value, everything that's going on right now, do we feel safer in the world in Biden's America? We've got basically almost the edge of World War III with nuclear weapons in Ukraine. That possibility always exists. They continue to, aggress and antagonize Russia. And instead of working towards peace between Russia and Ukraine, then you've got Nancy Pelosi flying over to Taiwan and China deciding to do missile exercises with some missiles falling into, the sea around Japan. It's like, man, so all this stuff doesn't seem like we're much safer, and all the stuff they criticize Trump for, trying to make peace with Russia, trying to make peace with North Korea, all these different things, the image of Trump walking across into the DMZ and with North Korea, that's a really amazing image. And if it was any other president that didn't have an R next to their name or wasn't named Trump, that would be looked at as like a really historically huge moment. Like he walked across, no security. They grab soldiers. The North Koreans grab South Korean soldiers all the time from there and try to, capture them, put them in. Trump was defenseless and vulnerable, and in an effort to make peace, exposed himself that way, and it added to some peace in the region, which was really amazing to me. But it was lost, obviously, on the rest of the media. The only time that the media liked Trump was when he launched missiles into Syria. That was the only time that they thought he was being really presidential, and coincidentally, Bolton also really liked that, and Bolton would have loved to have a lot more of that. So yeah, Bolton is not. When Bolton is involved anywhere in any sort of executive area, we are not safe, because in his mind, the safest America is one that is, exporting violence around the globe. And we've seen what happens. They made fun of the blowback theory and all that stuff, but it's like, no, that's pretty much true. In Bolton's eyes, any sort of stuff, whether it's giving arms and weapons and selling them indirectly to, Al Qaeda, or doing arming both sides of a conflict are acceptable to him, as long as we are fighting wars over there instead of over here, which inevitably we end up fighting over here. So
yeah, I mean it's funny because it's just another hilarious way in which Occupy Democrats, which started as a very from the ground roots populist, like you think of Occupy Democrats was almost the foreshadowing of the Bernie momentum and movement, in terms of it was, a lot of real people gathering outside to protest. And again, I think they had the wrong cure in mind, but they correctly diagnosed a very real problem. And it's like they were against the idea of bailing out these banks. They were against the idea of these big corporate entities receiving special treatment from the government. And what corporate entities more than like arms contractors and bankers that like fund these kinds of military projects are the least public facing and public serving kinds of corporations, like the worst ones to bail out. Because it's like, even if you don't like corporate subsidies for something like Amazon, which I don't, at the very least, Amazon is providing a service like to the everyday person, let alone their Amazon Web Services that support thousands and thousands of other sites that are also going to help, consumers and basic population people. But it's like these arms manufacturers and other kinds of corporations and again, financial institutions that go to financing these wars, they're the most entrenched, least publicly helpful ones. And so Occupy Democrats was standing against that when it started, this decentralized movement. And as soon as you centralize it into this movement, it's like, I don't know, 10 years later, it's like, retweet if you think John Bolton is right, because John Bolton's talking about how dumb Donald Trump is. Like, they've really lost their way.
Closing out a tweet with retweet if you think that this is right or whatever. It's the equivalent of, forward this email if you agree, sort of thing. It's just so ick. It's a good point. I mean, the military industrial complex, funding them, they literally are lighting money on fire. All the money that you give to them, they light on fire. The only thing that would be awesome is like, okay, well, anything that they make, we also get to own, because then at least we're getting something. Then they're on about the same level as Amazon, right. Then all the cool things they produce, we can own and keep everyone else in check. But maybe we wouldn't fire so much into other countries if we could threaten our own government with it. But not advocating for violence, just saying.
No, absolutely right. Okay, we'll move on to our next post here. And this one comes from Representative Val Demings, who I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is a Florida Democrat. I think she's running against Marco Rubio for Senate. So she's trying to get her public profile up there. And she tweets out, "We just voted to lower your medical costs, and every Republican voted no." Okay, and she's talking about the Green New Deal, Build Back Better, Inflation Reduction Act, all the same thing, just renamed every time and more money added to it, basically. And, not a unique point, something we've brought up all the time, but if you are so dumb as to believe that not only, if the title of a bill is one thing, when you think, oh, it's the Inflation Reduction Act, it's actually going to reduce inflation. Like, obviously that's stupid and silly. But even trusting in the idea that this bill will do X, Y, or Z, that, just accepting that at face value, because who, like some bureaucrats who wrote this said so. They say that the medical costs are going to get lowered by this, but in actuality, you're going to end up with, middle class and lower class taxpayers feeding into this disgusting system that's going to ultimately end up hurting and raising costs all the more, just in the same ways that they try to tell you that, investing in green projects and stuff is going to cause a cheaper future for all. It's like, it's going to cause a cheaper future for the companies that get the subsidies. It's going to be like, this will be cheaper for, it helps bail out some of the medical practitioners who already have it in good with the government, but it's not going to make it cheaper and lower costs on the consumer. I mean, even the process when you have insurance, like, it's so backwards and not market oriented in its current state, let alone all these extra bailouts. You think about, like, I just went in for a sleep study, and I was diagnosed with mild sleep apnea. So they're like, okay, so we're gonna request a machine. And first of all, the machines are in short supply right now, and so it's gonna be a while. And they're like, well, we'll place the order. And I'm like, okay, well, how much is this gonna cost, and how much will my insurance cover it? And they're like, well, we'll know after we place the order.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, excuse me? Like, I obviously am going to have to pay up to a certain point of deductible. So, most people are just like, oh, well, I'll just pay my deductible and that's it. But I'm like, no, I want to know what the cost is, because I want to know if it's worth it or not. And because if it's a mild thing, maybe I can look into alternate places, or I can get a price bid against somewhere else to try to use some HSA funds that I've saved up for that. And no, that they can't tell me that until they've already placed the order. So it's absolutely insane and wild. Whereas if you thought about it, like even if we took all the money that we're dumping into the system right now and just put it in these like health savings accounts type things where it's restricted money, but it's tax free and you have to spend it in certain, medical ways, that's still not great. But it's a much more free market type thing. I would be able to shop around at different places and get a good quote and a good price because I'm trying to keep track of how much is in my savings account. Of course, this Inflation Reduction Act does nothing like that. All it does is, try to say, we're just going to reduce costs on the front end that you see. Meanwhile, all the costs go up on the back end that you don't see. And it's just that, we'll know after 1 week of ordering it for you.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. I mean, they talk about transparent pricing and all that stuff, and it's like that is the exact opposite of transparent pricing. The part that really gets me on this one is, or I guess on any post like this, is when there's this thought that government can lower costs anywhere. The only way that costs ever get lowered in anything is if the business decides to lower costs because they have some sort of innovation or advantage, or there's a strategic reason to do so. When government says they're lowering costs, what they're saying is, hey, we're going to either subsidize it with your tax dollars, so you're still paying for it one way or the other. Proportionally, you might not be paying as much of it, but like society in broad ways is paying for it, and there are people that will reap zero benefit from that. So the cost is either leveraged onto the taxpayer, or they force the business to have costs lowered, and then the business has to eat the cost of whatever, the price differential. And that's how that's a really scary area to be in, because then basically you're making people slaves. And that's the with the Medicare for all sort of philosophy of, well, no, like you should be able to go get healthcare for free anytime you want and what you need. It's like, well, doctors have to be paid, and if you're saying that they have to offer their services to you for free, someone has to pay for it. And if it's someone that is not receiving that cost, that's wrong. If the doctor is not going to be paid, then that means you are, forcing the doctor to perform labor, which is slavery. So there is no such thing as government lowering costs. There's only government imposing restrictions. I guess you could say that the only way the government does lower costs is they can pass and legalize freedom in such a way that other businesses can then eventually lower costs. But that's not the same thing. And so it's so these people have such a God complex about their ability to affect change in society, that they actually think that by signing a piece of paper, they can lower costs all across the country in every instance. You can't. Someone pays for it. You're not generating anything by signing that paper. You're just imposing new rules, which when you impose new rules, that means things are less efficient, which means costs don't actually go down.
Yeah, I like your I like that, legalizing freedom, because that reduces the cost in the same way that how the Biden administration tweeted out that graph recently about how it was the quickest and greatest reduction in gas prices in the history of the US. And it's because it showed this chart of it. It's like, yeah, maybe it fell that much because it was up so high and it escalated so high when you when we had these inflationary effects or whatever, which is just so funny. And so it's like, yeah, you can have the government lower costs by, relinquishing more of its own control, eliminating more of its own presence to do that, saying like, hey, you're going to raise the prices, and then being like, all right, you're not going to raise the prices anymore. And then
what a success.
Yeah. And, the other aspect of this too is and every Republican voted no. And, of course, as we talked about, it is stupid. And if I was in Congress, I would have voted no just as well. But I wouldn't count on my Republican friends as being allies in this matter either. Because think about how socialized our system is. Think about how Obamacare was such a massive leap towards the socialized medicine sector. And then remember that, wait a minute, what happened in 2016? Oh, yeah, we had a Republican-controlled Senate. We had a Republican-controlled House. And we had a Republican-controlled president. And not only was it a Republican president, it was a populist Republican president, someone who allegedly was there to get stuff done. And how many repeals of Obamacare did we see? I don't think we saw any. So all of this talk about, Republicans being so courageous and stuff, I don't doubt that there are some populist Republicans who wanted to do with it. I mean, even I would say ones I don't ideologically agree with. Like, to reference a previous episode, I bet that Joe Kent would have voted for an Obamacare repeal. Now, I also think that Joe Kent would probably have voted for subsidies to keep some like pre-existing condition things going on as well, because at the end of the day, it's all about controlling voter blocks and power, really. But that being said, I don't doubt that there are people, even who I disagree with, who would have. But the vast majority of Republicans and people who espouse free market ideals do not believe them. They do not want to actually enact these things, and when they are given the opportunity, they conveniently focus on other things. I mean, even not even a policy that I really agree with, but think about the fact that what was Trump's biggest campaign promise? It was building this stupid wall. Where's the wall? It's not there. So again, whether you think it's intentional because of like sabotage from outside forces or whatever, I tend to think when you have a Republican trifecta, you'd be able to actually do something impressive with medical, removing government, legalizing freedom, just removing yourself more and more from the equation. But they weren't able to get that done. So this big Republicans voted no. It's like, yeah, Republicans suck, but not for the reason that you're saying. Republicans suck because they only vote no when they know that nothing is actually bound to change.
Yeah, they just looked at the political headwinds of it, and we're like, oh, well, we better all vote no on this one, and it's still going to get passed because they got all the right people in place on the other side. That it's who was Mr. Republican John McCain is the one that stopped the repeal of Obamacare, and so it's like those guys, they just choose what they want to when they want to based on, like you're saying, the voter blocks.
I think the best thing Republicans are good for is stopping change. And they're not very good at that.
No.
So they hardly ever will revert a bad policy. At best, they will maybe obstinately stop a bad one from being enacting, but that will only go for so long, and then eventually they will break and bend, as all politicians tend to. Okay. We are moving to our next tweet, and this one, this is an image that's being shared by this individual who tweets, "This is facts, #educator, #UFC San Diego."
I don't know why he did that, but
I don't know. Anyway, and this image reads, "If substitute teaching became a requirement like jury duty, I bet we would see how quickly everyone's attitude changes towards educators." And this is this is weird and kind of goofy and awkward take. On the one hand, I hope this isn't a serious proposal that's being, shot out there, because that's a terrible idea. Like, I do not want the majority of people teaching a group of kids like on a one-off basis. And it's funny because in general, I believe that more people should be teaching than not, right? I actually believe, in a better society, you're teaching your own kids, kind of a thing, right? Like, and I think that there's room for co-op type activities from experts and things like that. But primarily, children should be educated from their own household in the best kinds of scenarios. And you can lean on resources from experts and stuff. That being said, I do not want the majority of people coming into the classrooms and teaching on this kind of a basis, because you would just have such an inconsistent, terrible system. I mean, it's just unworkable and unfeasible. And I don't think that's the point of this post, but it's just such a goofy and funny idea. I couldn't help but entertain it. And just the idea that like someone gets called in for substitute teaching duty, and these poor kids are just going to get so cajoled and jostled with all these terrible substitute teachers, people who don't know the kids' needs, who don't, because for all of the things I don't like about public schools, public school teachers, especially the younger ones who are newer into the system, they genuinely a lot of the time care about their students.
Sure.
And it's the system of schooling them that strangles and chokes these really great teachers. And so you think in like how like in a private system, those people would be rewarded and flourished. But one of the advantages of consistent teachers, whether that's homeschool, private, or public, is that the teachers who are with the students every day know the needs. And again, the smaller the classroom size, the better, because you have more individualized care, the more individual needs are met and kind of stuff. And so the idea of just like throwing in a random citizen for jury duty like stuff as substitute teaching, of course, violating their own freedom, but also just violating those poor kids with like random person 327 coming in. This just makes me shudder a little bit.
Well, I mean, I don't know. You were homeschooled in a little bit of public high school, right?
I had some private high schooling. Yeah,
private high school. Okay, so I had a few classes. I was homeschooled mainly, but then I had some public school classes. And I mean, we had substitute teachers in there at the apex of public education, my senior year. And these substitute teachers, they're glorified babysitters. They just sat in there. That's it. So at least if you got some HVAC tech or plumber or something to go in, drew the lottery ticket, at least maybe there might be a little bit better discipline in the classroom, and they might actually learn some sort of life experience. But that also brings me to the point. It's like I have this very big bone to pick with like public school teacher veneration. It's like they have, the absolute best benefits in terms of, pension plans and all that stuff. They work less hours during the school year than the average American worker. They work definitely less hours during the summer, about half as many than the average American worker, for a total of about 25% less hours total throughout their careers. And when you average that in terms of cost to actually become a teacher and the actual pay and the pension plan, they make as much hourly as a doctor does. And so, all these teachers and people will come out and be like, oh, we need to appreciate teachers, and oh, we need to pay them more and all these things. It's like, no, like they actually have it better off than the average American worker. And so that brings me to the point of like, let's, I guarantee you if we made it a requirement like jury duty for everyone to be a garbage man, or everyone to work in sales, or for everyone to work in IT or to work in accounting, everyone's opinions would very much change, towards those professions. Every profession that generates value is really, really hard. It's really hard because it takes effort, it takes work. If it didn't take effort and it didn't take work, no one would pay you for it because everyone would want to do it and would be doing it. And so I kind of take huge issue with the sentiment of this image that like, oh, like we take these teachers for granted. It's like, no, like maybe we could appreciate certain aspects of what they do or whatever, but everyone has a hard job. Everyone that's generating value has a hard job. And so like the sentiment's kind of bunk on that fact. And then and statistically, right, they're better off financially than the average American worker. So yeah, it really, when I saw that, the reason I saw it was because I was looking through, I'm remembering now, I watched UFC San Diego, and I was looking at related tweets to it, because someone that I really like got knocked out, which was really sad. And then this popped up. I was like, what the heck is this garbage doing in my feed? But this guy obviously knew that it was trending, so that's why he put it on there.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because it makes me think about how a lot of countries require like military service and stuff, and a lot of conservatives talk about, oh, that's so great, it teaches them discipline and stuff. And I just think at a certain point, you also have to recognize that there are beneficial things that you don't own someone's body for. And I think the military is a more egregious example because you're actually, instilling a lot of like how you have to think, and at worst committing acts that are immoral. But even, requiring something like this for substitute teaching or jury duty, it's like you're telling someone that they do not own their body, they do not own their own freedom of choice and movement to do as they wish and do as they please. And that we know better than you, and you are going to learn this beneficial thing. And there's a lot of things. I mean, like, I think, by and large, the vast majority of people would become a lot better people if they went to church regularly. And I don't think we should legislate that or make it a requirement on a certain day of the week or whatever, because that's not a good principle to have. It violates someone's freedom, violates their individual rights as a human, which can always be used against you to violate yours, even if it's being used in a way you like, because you personally think it will benefit them. Power like this always gets turned. So even in this sort of lighthearted, just another substitute, jury duty, substitute teaching scenario, I'm like, no, let's have fewer things where we require. And this tweet Still wouldn't have been my favorite, but at least would have been better if it said, if substitute teaching was a vocation people could voluntarily join in, and more people did, like we would see how their attitudes changed, or like if the people who decried teachers the loudest did a day of substitute teaching, they would change their minds. Like that would be a much more reasonable tweet than the idea of like, if we had the government force people to go in and do this thing. I just hate it whenever anyone says
sure
to the effect of there should be a law.
Sure. I don't have any more on it. It's one of those, because I'm homeschooled and because I just see how awful it is. I get a little riled up about it, but
yeah,
you're a little
totally.
bit kinder on them. I have a lot. I actually know a few public school teachers that I really, really care about and like, but I think they're the vast minority. I view public school teachers like I view politicians. There's like one or two that I like, and the rest of them are awful.
Well, I think a lot of the ones that I like are getting burned out and leaving. So it's like one of those things where, again, the people who stay usually are the rotten ones. So I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. Okay, moving on to our last post. This one comes fresh from when we're recording this episode, just an hour old or so, maybe two. This one is from Andrew Yang, who tweets, "Whether she wins her Wyoming primary tomorrow or not, Liz Cheney has demonstrated leadership and character at a higher level than just about anyone in American politics."
Oh, brother. I like how he's got the blue cap in his in his name. Maybe that's why.
I don't know if that an icon of the Forward Party or something?
Well, I think it's the math hat, but it's also, I mean, it's become no cap. Like, it's...
Yeah. His, I was going to say, I know the arrow with the American flag is his Forward Party, like little, iconography or whatever. And man, this is cringe. So Andrew Yang has more and more just been outing himself as a shill and a hack and a goofball. I saw Michael Malice tweet that he's like, I just realized that he's probably trying to get Liz Cheney to be on the ticket in 2024 for the Forward Party. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that would make sense, right? Like, him trying to compliment and, snake tongue his way into getting her affections or whatever. But Liz Cheney is just a terrible person. And I saw someone who when I went to university, he was a professor at our university, and I liked him a lot. He was a liberal Democrat, but he was sort of the honest liberal, not the totally radicalized at that time liberal. And so we always had really great discussions and sort of debates, and almost more, not even debates so much as, talking about issues and bringing different perspectives forward. It was never hostile. It never felt anything, bad like that. And, we were very aligned, and sort of, we always joked about the anti-war caucus. We were like, you know what, maybe a Rand Paul, Bernie Sanders ticket could work on anti-war, was kind of our joke. And even he started quoting Liz Cheney at the start of these January 6 hearings. And I was like, it was, something about integrity. And I was like, man, I would not put the words Liz Cheney and integrity anywhere in the same sentence, so weird, remotely. Man. And to highlight that, we've got this tweet from Liz Cheney back in 2018. And she's quote tweeting John McCain. Now, you and I, of course, do not like John McCain.
The one time he was right.
Yeah, exactly. Wood's Law, no matter who you vote for, you get John McCain. But the one thing that John McCain did not suck on was torture, because he was a prisoner of war. He had been tortured. He knew how cruel and inhumane it was.
Kind of like the jury duty thing.
Yeah. And so he tweeted out, "The torture of detainees in U.S. custody during the last decade was one of the darkest chapters in American history. The Senate must do its job in scrutinizing the record and involvement of Gina Haspel in this disgraceful program." This was when she was being considered for some position. I do not remember what it was. I think it was like vice chair of the CIA director, or some position like that, or maybe the full chair. I don't know. But Liz Cheney quote retweeted him saying, "The enhanced interrogation program saved lives, prevented attacks, and produced intel that led to Osama bin Laden. The techniques were the same as those used on our own people in the SERE program. No one should slander the brave men and women who carried out this crucial program." So she's just outright defending torture there. So Whatever person you are on the right or the left, I hope we can sort of come around and think Liz Cheney is not an honorable person. She is not a decent human. Even if you want a recent example with this whole, how heroic she's being, as far as these, the January 6th hearing goes and defending democracy, whatever that means. She was reading like a Trump tweet out, and she stopped at mid-tweet. Tweets are only like 240 characters long, or however long, 280. She stopped at mid-tweet because she was saying that the tweet was evidence that he called for violence, when literally the next sentence was him saying, like, condemning violence, saying, like, don't be violent in the tweet. So, like, she is not someone of honor. She's not someone of integrity. She's a hack. She's a moral grandstander in all the worst ways. And Andrew Yang should be thoroughly and utterly embarrassed by this tweet. And I hope it comes back to haunt him. And I hope that everyone sees what a clown and a phony she is, and that he just faces utter humiliation and delegitimization from this tweet.
Yeah, it's like when you think of Andrew Yang, like we're talking about, he's got the blue hat. It's math, make America think hard, or something like that, I think was the acronym.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
And his you and I never really liked him necessarily, but like I appreciated his honesty in certain ways, which was like when he was asked about climate change at the debates, he's like, hey, if this is real, it's time to head for higher ground because it's too late. And it's like, okay, I appreciate that, type of honesty, because it's like whether or not we agree on stuff, at least we think that there is truth, right? Like, and he's willing to stand on and shift his positions. And it's like, okay, so you're saying that Liz Cheney, who also holds the same, from this tweet you can obviously see the same ideas that her dad, Dick Cheney, holds, is just, it's like I don't think you could hype up a more dishonest family. In American history, a guy that was so set on getting weapons made and sold and printed so that we could go blow up people, that he would lie about weapons of mass destruction in different countries, and then authorize these programs to, detain people sometimes for decades unjustly and torture them unjustly. Just so that, he could make the military industrial complex could make a little bit more money, and they could kind of prove their point. I don't think there's a more villainous character in the past 20 years than Dick Cheney in a lot of ways. And you see his video, of him. It's just so ironic, him endorsing Liz Cheney and talking about what a threat Donald Trump is. There's never been a greater threat to democracy than Donald J. Trump. It's like, man, you're the guy that, that was responsible for getting all sorts of awful things through. That the entire intelligence apparatus that spies on all of us, and basically is the forebearer of this COVID vaccine tracking system and all that, like, that makes it possible and scary. Like, you're the guy who did that. You are the threat to the little guy and the individual rights being protected. And so it's just so disappointing to me. Andrew Yang, at least I felt like, operated off of a principle of individual liberty with, like, well, there needs to be restraints, but it's clear that he doesn't actually believe in individual liberty, because making a deal or, promoting or talking about Liz Cheney as if she's awesome, or anyone in the Cheney family, it means that you're either incredibly stupid, which I don't want to support you in that way if you are, or you are dishonest. And I think Andrew Yang has demonstrated he's somewhat smart. So I think it's the latter. He's just a dishonest person.
Yeah, it's like he wants his forward party to be some form of mechanism of relevancy. And because he recognizes that he doesn't have a place in the Democrat Party. And so rather than, trying to forward and make things better, he wanted to make his own party. But it seems like he's so bent on it gaining notoriety that he'll endorse anyone or anything for any reason. So, I think he always talks about how, hey, we're helping libertarians too. And it's like, look, any libertarian worth their salt should be ashamed of an Andrew Yang endorsement, and I say that with all due respect to Larry Sharpe.
Yes.
And it's no bad stuff to Larry, because I know Larry's trying to get ballot access, and I don't blame him. But frankly, I would not want any association with Andrew Yang. I would not want any association with someone who would endorse Evan McMullin, McMuffin Boy, the CIA dude, just because he's a Republican who spoke out against Trump. It seems like Andrew Yang's modus operandi is I will accept anyone who claims they are of one party and then speaks badly about someone else in that party. Doesn't matter what their principle is, doesn't matter what their operation is. Like, he's probably, Andrew Yang's probably like, John Bolton said that we're safer under Joe Biden. Well, shoot, he deserves a spot in the Forward Party,
Yeah,
like,
it's very like the Libertarian Party of 2016 and 15, man. Like,
yeah,
the ones that ran Gary Johnson and Bill Weld because they were Republican governors in purple states. It's like, well, look how that worked out for you, and then you had, Jill Jorgensen in 2020 trying to kind of do the same thing, like have this palatable, like, oh, I'm the common, I am friends with everyone persona at the expense of like actually having a principled stance. And I think she got the second most votes, in the Libertarian with the one being the most right before her, which is pretty funny. So I think we'll probably go the same way for Andrew. It's you can't really straddle this middle line where you're friends with everyone, because then it's like, well, if you're friends with everyone, why would I vote for you over the people that you're friends with? And no one's going to. Yep.
Exactly right. Well, especially when you're like, okay, but like, why would I get behind the Forward Party when it doesn't stand for anything? Like, it's so funny. I've seen both people on the right and the left, and liberty areas asking these very direct questions, like, where are you on gun rights? Where do you support on freedom of speech? What do you believe when it comes to like abortion? And they can't answer because they've endorsed people all over the place.
Did you see the one with Jim Acosta?
No.
So Jim Acosta asked Andrew, like, what's the Forward Party stance on Roe v. Wade? And he gave his classic, the Forward Party is not about being left or being right. It's about being forward. And Jim Acosta, for once, actually pushed back. He's like, I don't even know what that means in relation to the question. It was awkward, man. It was so awkward. We should have shown that one. I should have grabbed that one.
That's great.
But it's exactly what you're saying, right? Like, he has no principled stance other than to get airtime.
Yeah. And so, yeah, exactly. So it's completely useless. You're not building a movement around anything. You're just trying to gain brownie points from the establishment by endorsing people like Liz Cheney, or looking like the good guy for people who don't like the idea of a oligarchy, two-state party kind of thing. It's like, or duopoly, I should say, not oligarchy, duopoly. But it's like, all you're doing is trying to appeal to the person who feels disenfranchised, but not in any meaningful way. Disenfranchised Republicans, you don't like Donald Trump, great. Disenfranchised libertarians who want to tear down the duopoly, great. Disenfranchised Democrats who feel like, I don't know, any number of issues that I can't even think of because they're not discerned on anything. So it's frustrating because you're just going to build a coalition that amounts to nothing, because in order for a coalition to work, it can't just be a bunch of people who feel morally superior to their peers of their former party. That doesn't, you don't go anywhere. You go in circles more than you go forward.
I like it.
All right. Well, unless there's any other closing thoughts from you, I think we're good to wrap up this episode. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Remember to leave that like, comment, DM us, do what you will, interact. We love it. We love getting those messages from you guys. And we will catch you on the next one.